Good evening, sir.
Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Uh, Sorry, actually, there was no power, and for some reason, the Wi-Fi is not running on. What should I say? It's not running on the inverter, uh, and I thought of putting on my phone hotspot, but my phone has, it seems to have discharged, and so I didn't have in the signal. So anyway, thanks for your patience and thanks for coming back, even though it's a bit late. So we'll have a shortish class, and it was actually taking this class was very important for me. It was very important for me for the simple reason that um, today is actually the second death anniversary of my father, and the year before last, um, I was very ill, and he was worried that I was not in a position to go to work. So he was very keen that I return to work. And after a spell of hospitalization, I got back to work. So that was, and he was happy. So he was happy that I was able to work, go get back to work, that is. And so it was very important for me to take this class. I was feeling a little disappointed. Yeah. So we were talking about the American, um, sorry, uh, we were talking yesterday about the United States of America. It came into being it notionally came into being in 1776 CE. And the reason why I say it notionally came into being in 1776 is uh, because of the fact that the Declaration of Independence The Declaration of Independence was submitted in this year. Now, what has happened? This was given to the British monarch. Now, from this period to the time that the constitution of Britain, what am I saying? The Constitution of America was adopted. (1789), I think the date is January 21st. Is it January? I'm not sure. Is it January or March? 21st is when it definitely the date on which it was adopted was 21st, but the month was it January or March? I think it is January. And post 1776, the nation fought different wars. Okay, the first, the main war that it fought, the main war that it fought was against England first. And if you remember what I told you yesterday, England was already reeling with this problem of not having uh, soldiers, sufficient number of soldiers that were being paid. They didn't have enough money. And when the Declaration of Independence was submitted by Thomas Jefferson and later and by John Adams and Samuel Adams, you will find that uh, the English monarch didn't take too kindly to it, and he sent his troops to America. Now, the problem that the English monarch basically faced was that he could not um, get enough money to pay his troops that were fighting the war in America. Okay, so when this particular thing happened, when the troops were not paid by the king, then obviously they saw no reason why they had to fight for the king, and hence they became Americans. So suddenly, except for a handful of people, literally a handful, which is, I think, 101 soldiers were left who were loyal to the king. And these people were originally not 101. Ultimately, those were the number of people who were there. But the loyalists, as they are called, the loyalists were loyal to the King of England. They were loyal to the King of England. And if you actually see, uh, there were also loyalists among the American settlers. Okay. Um, so initially, they were able to offer resistance to the army that was led by um, George Washington. Okay. Um, they offered some opposition, but later on, that whole thing disintegrated due to lack of money with the British monarch. And so we are looking at a situation where, there was no more British army. And but that was not the end of the war. There was also a war that was fought, uh, and it's called the the French occupation. Okay, and all this time we're still talking only about the 13 states, the New England states that were there. They came under French occupation. Now, originally, after the victory over the British forces, George Washington had decided to retire uh, and go back to he was a farmer, and he married somebody uh, who was also, um, she was actually a widow. I forget her name. And she was also interested in farming. So he retired, and he had to come out of retirement once the French occupation happened. The French occupation happened in what are today states like Vermont, Massachusetts, and even Pennsylvania. Uh, so Washington came back and led the forces again to victory. It's not as simple as I'm making it sound. Like this is almost like, superstar Krishna, or a better example, I think, is Nagarjuna. Um, Previous heroes of the Telugu films at least used to get hit 2 or 3 times in a fight with the villains. They used to get hit. But after Nagarjuna came, the whole fighting format changed. Sorry, in the Telugu film industry, uh, the heroes don't even land. The villains don't even land one small punch on the hero. He just hits them, and um, they just fall apart, and they'll all be writhing in pain. So it's not, I'm making it sound like that, okay? As if George Washington just came. Washington faced quite a few problems. There was desertion of troops, and at one time, his army, which is not a proper organized army because the country itself had not come into existence fully and completely. And as a result, what you see is that there isn't a proper army, and people were deserted whenever they found it convenient, and they would join it when they found it convenient. So there was a time when even Washington's army came down to a very small number of about 11,000 soldiers. Okay, and so it's not all so easy that he just came out and he led the he was he was the one who coined this phrase, unionists. Okay, he coined this particular phrase. Unionists were those who wanted unity among the 13, sorry, 12 states of America, okay, which were not 12, 13. Yeah, 13 states of the United States of America. Okay, so uh, he, he coined this term unionists, and he did manage to defeat the French also. And in the meanwhile, he was at one time very unhappy because some of the soldiers were attacking Canada. Okay, because if you look at the border of Canada with uh, the United States of America, you'll see that the southern border of Canada and the northern border of the United States of America, sorry, very sorry, um, these borders uh, were, where the French settlements were. Okay, and so you have areas like Montreal, Quebec, Quebec, actually. Yes, Akshay?
I was going to say that name, so Quebec.
Yeah. It is actually supposed to be pronounced Quebec. That's the French pronunciation. And Montreal, we say Montreal, The Americans say Montreal, uh, but actually the French pronunciation of that was Montreal. Okay, uh, that was the actual pronunciation of Montreal, uh, Montreal, and a few decades ago there was actually a referendum held in order to see if the French Canadians wanted to remain with Canada or they wanted to become independent. And that showed 52% of the French Canadians, uh, or was it 51 or 52, not less, not more than those. Uh, they said we'll be apart in the referendum. The others said no, we want to be independent. But, but the small majority made the difference and they continue to be a part of Canada today. That's the French speaking area. But nowadays it isn't so like that. You'll find a lot of English people. I have to teach you one of the Canadian uh, professors of philosophy and uh, philosopher himself. Uh, I'm talking about Charles Taylor, Charles Charles Taylor. Jesus, what was that? Charles Taylor. I'm supposed to teach you the sources of the self. Uh, Again, I think I told you I had the pleasure of really the true pleasure of meeting Noam Chomsky 3 times, not once. Well, this is even better. I met Charles Taylor 4 times in India. Okay, in India, and so he used to say, "You can call me Chuck." Okay, apparently that was his name in the family. People used to call him Chuck Taylor. And I also was told by him only in a conversation, and he's a great conversationalist. Unlike Noam Chomsky, who's not a great conversationalist, you'll find that Charles Taylor is somebody who makes a wonderful conversationalist. And he uh, said that people, he was at that time in the McGill University, and later on moved to the University of Montreal. But he also served in Oxford. So he said, all in every place that I work, people call me Chuck Taylor. So anyway, that was just an interesting aside. Uh, and I say it is an interesting aside because he is a tremendous uh, mind. He's a great um, thinker, a fantastic scholar of Hegel, the most uh, well defined work on Hegel came from Charles Taylor. And this particular work is simply called Hegel. Okay, and he wrote this particular work. Till then, people considered Raymond Plant's work on Hegel to be a seminal work, but and it continues to be a great work. There's no doubt about that. Uh, Raymond Plant's work on Hegel, but Charles Taylor is even better uh, writer on Hegel, and there is after him one more person came who wrote a great commentary, especially on uh, the philosophy of right. Okay, which was uh, a very good work on that particular work. The last one, last writing of Hegel is Bernard Cullen, uh, Bernard, Bernard Cullen, Cullen. Anyway, so Charles Taylor is now an octogenarian or probably even a nonagenarian. I don't know, and he's an activist, and he interestingly opposes multiculturalism, which again I have to teach with in political ideologies. Will Kimlicka's ideas of multiculturalism. That is what I'm supposed to be teaching, and he's not very fond of Kimlicka, uh, and he actually says that it is the whole multicultural idea that is put forward by uh, supporters of multiculturalism, he believes is flawed. And he has worked for, you know, uh, bringing into the mainstream of Canadian politics the French speaking areas like Montreal and Quebec. Okay, so that's the story as far as Charles Taylor is concerned. And like I was saying, so there was an attack, and Washington was not happy about that, and so the attack was withdrawn. Uh, and you'll see that Washington in the USA, people compare him to this particular figure. Have any of you heard of this figure? Cincinnatus? No? Okay. Do you know that there is a place called Cincinnati in the US? Look up the map, you'll find it. Cincinnati is on the East Coast. And thank God they don't say Cincinnati. Okay, they actually say Cincinnati. Okay, so Cincinnati was named after Cincinnatus, but the true inspiration for naming that state as Cincinnati came from George Washington. Okay, George Washington was called the modern day Cincinnatus. Now, in the days of Republican Roman period, you had this figure, Cincinnatus. And Cincinnatus, you will see, is the person who was a peasant but who took up military leadership in order to fight a war on behalf of the Romans. Uh, and you will see that uh, Cincinnatus, after defeating the enemies, goes back to being a farmer. And a few years later, there is a war yet again, and Cincinnatus comes back, becomes the general, and then leads Rome to victory again. So Washington was also a general because he put the army together, and he came and fought the loyalists, and then he decided to go back to his life in the plantations, uh, or he wanted to. The Americans call them planters. Okay, we call them agriculturists. They call them planters. Uh, and so he wanted to go back to be a planter, and he did go back. And again, when the problem with the French happened, he came out and fought. So even though and defeated them, even though the country called United States of America notionally came into being in 1776 CE, it formally comes into being in 1789, which is a tremendous coincidence because that is the period when you see that uh, France also had its, uh,
French
move.
Revolution.
Yeah, obviously, France will have only a French Revolution. France can't have an English Revolution, right? Or an Indian Revolution. 1789 was the year that the French Revolution was a spontaneous thing, by the way. It wasn't plotted, okay? It was just the hunger of the people that led to the French Revolution. Uh, and like I said, uh, it was probably the only revolution in the world where the king and the queen were both killed like common people by a guillotine, which we pronounce as guillotine, but it is actually supposed to be pronounced as guillotine. Okay, so therefore you will find that America's official um, existence comes into being in 1789. And that was a time when Americans were looking to expand westwards. Okay, they were looking to expand westwards because those were still territories that were not conquered. Okay, the 13 New England states were all on the east coast. Uh, they were not uh, anywhere near what is today called the Midwest and the West. Okay, so there was this expansion, and people were encouraged to expand, especially when the King of England's soldiers also deserted him. So they basically said, let's expand westwards. And that was the only way they could go because if they went southwards beyond Texas, uh, which was called Tejas, Tejas, Tejas. Uh, then they would have to fight the Spanish in Mexico. The pronunciation of Mexico in Spanish is Mexico. It's actually supposed to be pronounced Mexico or Mexico. And so they would have to fight the Spanish. And if they went up, they'll have to fight the French. And that's why, if you look at the map of America, it's broad and it's like a cinemascope film. You know what I mean? It covers the full screen, a wide screen, right? So if you look at the map, that's how it is. And you'll also see that we are exactly the opposite. We are long. And as we come into the peninsular region, we are thin. Okay. So, whereas this is like this horizontal expansion, and that's why they have 5 time zones. Anyway, so the thing that you need to understand is that George Washington, when because of his heroics, he was somebody who was asked to become the first president, and he went to the American Congress uh, and took his oath as the uh, president of America in his military uniform. Okay, because he said, it is this which has made me the president. And this was the time when people wanted to sideline Thomas Jefferson. Sorry. Um, so this was the time when um, people were getting a little wary of Thomas Jefferson because they're relying on him to write and draft everything, was making him feel as if he was some kind of a hotshot. Okay, and therefore you will see that Thomas Jefferson is backed off as ambassador to France. Later on, he did return and become president. Um, and Washington had his vice president in John Adams. I talked to you about the two brothers, John and Samuel Adams. So John Adams became the vice president. He later on became the president as well. Okay. Uh, and if you look at Washington, after his first term, he was really not interested in being the president. He wanted to go back to the plantation. So he was a true patriot. So he earned that particular um, sobriquet of patriot. And you will see that apart from John Adams, another person whom he included, whom he included in the uh, his secretaries, the Secretary of State. Okay, the Secretary of State at that time was this man called John Jay. Has anyone heard of him? Hmm? No? John Jay was the author of The Federalist. Originally, this work was called the Federalist Papers, but uh, John Jay preferred it to be called the Federalist. So, John Jay was the person who proposed federalism in America, despite the Constitution saying that it is a union of states. Okay, despite it saying that it's a union of states, you will find that the Federalist or the Federalist Papers played an extremely important role in America becoming a federation. And it was John Jay's influence on Alexander Hamilton. Okay, the writer of the Constitution was supposed to be Thomas Jefferson. Okay, because he's such a brilliant writer. Thomas Jefferson is a simply unbelievable writer. He writes with such clarity, you feel like going on reading him. Okay, uh, so he has that knack with language. Some people do. A friend of mine uh, from Nizam College, and the caveat here is that the Nizam College of then is not what it is now. It is now, it's a, but I don't want to, I can't use that word here. And in those days, it was a great place. Even though the faculty wasn't great, we had a fantastic peer group. And this chap was my classmate, and I used to love the way he used to write. Okay, and I don't know, he had great facility with the language, and the way he could write is, it is still amazing. Even a simple WhatsApp message that he puts is so well written. Okay, so Thomas Jefferson is like that, but people were getting a little scared of Thomas Jefferson. And therefore, what they did is that they asked Alexander Hamilton to write the Constitution. Okay, the inputs came from several people. The biggest input came from John Jay. Okay, there were inputs taken from uh, Thomas Jefferson as well, and there were quite a few inputs from George Washington, and you will also find inputs from the Adams brothers, John Adams and Samuel Adams. But the actual writing, drafting of the Constitution was something that was done by uh, Hamilton. Okay, and well, let me just narrate simple instance to you. Philadelphia is a very important, it's a very, very important place in American history because it was here that battles were won. It was here that all kinds of reforms were proposed. So when I went to Philadelphia, uh, I was absolutely stunned when they said that I can go into the Capitol, written Capitol. I hope you remember this. People there were very, not very, no, I don't know if I should say it. It sounds like I'm boasting. They were impressed with the knowledge that I had of America and of Philadelphia, especially the different things that happened in Philadelphia. And so some kind gentleman got, this was when it was holidays for the capital. And so I was given the permission to enter the capital of Philadelphia. And when I went into the House of Representatives, I didn't find anything particularly spectacular. But what hit me was when I went into the Senate. Okay, when I went into the Senate, obviously there was nobody there. Absolutely nobody there, except the escort to make sure that I don't do anything naughty, stupid, and all those kind of things. So, uh, it what hit me is the writings on the Senate wall. The writings, I'm sorry about that, the writings on the Senate's walls, which were like Roman alphabet, the Latin alphabet. If you look at the Roman U, uh, it is like V. They don't write it like U, they write it like V. And that is how, though you pronounce it and call it W, it's double, it looks like a double V, because in the Latin alphabet, this character was represented like a V. U was represented like a V. So there is this hilarious film. Okay, uh, if ever you get a chance to see it, please see it. The History of the World by Mel Brooks. Mel Brooks, this is, I think, one of the most amazing comedians, and he's made some really, really funny films. And the funniest of them all is The History of the World. And in that, when he's depicting the Roman period, so the Romans are giving out tols, and somebody comes and tells him something which Mel Brooks, who's giving out the dole, doesn't understand. He says, "Can you repeat that?" And the person repeats it. He still does not understand. So he says, "I give up. You are completely nuts. NVTS, nuts." That's what he says. And nuts is actually an American expression, the slang. You know, when you say somebody is, the British say marbles. Okay, somebody's lost his marbles. That is the British, this thing for losing your mind. And a nutcase or somebody being nuts is losing your mind. Okay, it's an American thing. And I initially thought that he probably said it because it's a Roman period. Uh, but it probably could also be, or maybe I'm reading too much into it, that the Americans are so taken in with the Roman civilization that they have written their own proclamations in that Latin script, uh, which I told you is like this. So that was a piece of good fortune, seeing the capital in Philadelphia. Okay. Um, anyway, so to come back to the story, so it took so many years for the nation to actually come into being with a constitution, and people were inspired. When you look at the constitution, the inspiration came from two sources: the John Jay kind of a thing, the Federalist Papers, the Federalist, and also the intervention of George Washington. But there was a third intervention, which was the theory of separation of powers. Also called a system of checks and balances. So this was a very, though it came from the idea came from Montesquieu, a Frenchman, uh, you will find that the implementation of this was actually not done either in England, where Montesquieu saw this. Um, you will see that the inspiration came from Rome, ancient Rome. In ancient Rome, I told you, I think, so I'm not going to spend too much time on this. You had this whole thing called uh, the triumvirate. Okay, so the triumvirate, this is before Julius Caesar. Okay, the triumvirate consisted of um, the king, the Senate and the magistrates. The magistrates in the Roman period are different from the magistrates in the Greek period. In the Greek period, magistrates were, it was more of a thing about how somebody could judge good from bad, right from wrong, that kind of thing. Um, but the magistrates, in the case of the Roman period, the magistrates were actually people who were conversant with they were conversant with jurisprudence. Okay, uh, in order to become magistrates, that was a fundamental necessity. And I told you, I think there are so many of you, I don't know who I told what. Uh, the Romans didn't produce great philosophers like the Greeks did. They produced people like Cicero, Seneca. Yes, Akshay?
Nothing.
Nothing. Okay. Um, so Cicero, Seneca, the senior, and Seneca, the junior, and these people were into jurisprudence. And if you look at, uh, if you basically look at the other kind of people, they are represented by Virgil, who was working on languages, not languages, language and its uh, syntax. Okay, he was mainly working on that. So the Roman language is pretty evolved, uh, the Latin language, that is. It is not like the primitive languages that we have in Europe today. Okay, but it was not as evolved as Sanskrit. Sanskrit, I don't know how it evolved. Nobody knows the history of the evolution of Sanskrit. But you can look at the evolution of Latin, and people will tell you that Sanskrit and Latin were more or less, what Sanskrit is to India, Latin is to Europe. So you see them as two ancient languages with equal status. Not true. Not at all true. Sanskrit still exists in its original form. Latin doesn't exist in that form anymore. Hardly anyone studies Latin now. And Latin is also a much newer language compared to Sanskrit. And funnily enough, Latin is also classified as an Indo-European language. Okay, so there are influences of Sanskrit on Latin. There are more influences on Latin. I can't sit and talk about that, then this will become a class in linguistics, which I don't want this to be. So Virgil and people like that were working on the syntax of Latin. So you don't find too many philosophers. Seneca the Junior was a bit of a philosopher, but even his preponderance is with jurisprudence.
Sir, Marcus Aurelius,
Marcus Aurelius was an emperor.
he is also considered as an philosopher.
Um, Marcus Aurelius as a philosopher, yes, I think that particular this thing came to him thanks to John Stuart Mill, because John Stuart Mill is somebody who was for some reason very impressed with Marcus Aurelius, and Marcus Aurelius was also the Roman emperor who kind of paved the way for reconciliation of Roman civilization with Christianity. Okay, so there were many humanitarian tendencies, not humanist tendencies, but humanitarian tendencies in Marcus Aurelius. Uh, this pedestal that he has got is more due to John Stuart Mill. Uh, but really, Marcus Aurelius isn't in the same league as even Seneca the Junior. Uh, he's certainly not in any of the league of any of those amazingly bright Greek thinkers. He's not. Sorry to disappoint you about that, but you really can't call him a philosopher. Okay, he did more than an emperor does. To that extent, yes, he was a thinker. Being a thinker is different from being a philosopher, because a philosopher has to explain the world, or at least attempt to explain the world. In the case of Marcus Aurelius, you don't find that. What you find is that he has lent great thought to many issues which were otherwise not even considered as issues by Romans. Like, for example, how do you treat slaves? How do you treat people in the protectorate territories of the Roman Empire? All those things Marcus Aurelius talked about and wrote about. Uh, but he's not really a true philosopher in the proper sense of the term. Okay? But if you want to argue your case, I'm open to it.
I want to know, sir,
You want to know what?
is it Marcus Aurelius is a philosopher? You said that there are no philosophers from Roman Empire.
Yeah, not like, is he like Plato? I mean, Cicero is an amazing man, but is he like Aristotle? Is he like Plato? No. They were all working with this jurisprudence thing. Okay? They were all working with this jurisprudence thing, mostly. That is their main preoccupation. Okay, and in Cicero, there are some humanist tendencies, just a few humanist tendencies, because he wrote a small little work called Thou Shalt Be as Gods, okay, in which he talks about the potential of the human beings uh, to rise above the level that they were stuck in. Marcus Aurelius is somebody who is capable of deep empathy. He didn't have the arrogant demeanor or the attitude of an emperor. Uh, you'll find a great deal of humility in him, and you'll find that he is somebody who accepts a number of faults with the Roman civilization. And that is why I said he became a facilitator for the Roman civilization and Christianity, which were otherwise at loggerheads, to come together and become the Holy Roman Empire. And that is the most impressive thing about him. And that's what Mill also talks about. And Mill is a Marcus Aurelius fan. There was a time when I was also a Marcus Aurelius fan, but he's a philosopher, maybe, thinker, definitely, yes. Uh, his contributions, not as lasting and important and path breaking like any of the Roman thinkers, sorry, the Greek thinkers. No. But if you say that among conquerors, among this whole bunch of conquerors who, after Julius Caesar took on that name of his as their title, if you look at that bunch of people, among all those people, he stands out. He stands out for his humanitarianism, his empathy. He had all these finer human qualities which make him a great human being. There's no doubt about that. But I am a little, what should I say? A little afraid of putting that philosopher title on him. Okay, because many people have even called him philosopher emperor. And they said that, he's also like the philosopher king that Plato talked about. Uh, those, I think, are exaggerations. But he's a great man, has the ability to be a philosopher, but I don't know if he's a philosopher, and I could be wrong. Mine is not the last word on this here.
Okay, sir.
I'm sure there are others who will disagree with me. Yeah, you were saying something. I'm sorry.
Nothing, sir. I don't know. I have, for the reason of knowing, I asked you, sir.
No, there's nothing. You don't have to explain why you asked me. It's your right to ask a question. It's your
Okay.
right to have a question. It's your right. I considered him a philosopher at one time. But over the years, when I have read other people's opinions and when I have reread Marcus Aurelius, then I don't know. I thought he was a great thinker, but is he a philosopher? It's like Gandhi, one of my heroes. Uh, Gandhi is a great thinker, tremendous thinker, and a great practitioner as well. You know, um, he was not just all about thought. It's like Plato. He was almost like Plato, but I wouldn't call him a philosopher. I wouldn't call him a philosopher. I'd call him, at best, political thinker. Okay?
Yes, sir.
Okay. But like I said, you don't have to take my word for it, because these are all opinions that float around. This is one of the opinions. There could be something else that will tell you a different story or a different categorization. Maybe people will tell you that he is indeed a philosopher. Okay, so so there was this triumvirate, and this triumvirate was sought to be recreated in the United States of America. So we have, instead of the king, we have the president. Instead of just the Senate, we have the Congress, okay, which consists of two houses. The upper house is the Senate, and the lower house is House of Representatives. And then you have a judiciary. So they thought they were creating a system where they are looking at that kind of a triumvirate, and here they are looking at this in order to um, basically uh, see that there is a separation of powers and there'll be checks and balances. Uh, that is the theory. We'll come to the practice in the next class, but I'm not ending this class now. Just give me 2 more minutes. uh, what you have to understand is that the um, American system um, owes a lot to the um Roman thing, to the Roman system when Rome was a republic and not an empire. Uh, it says that there is a theory of separation of powers. Does it have? We'll discuss that in the next class. But one thing that you have to look at and believe is that the Senate is the upper house and the House of Representatives is the lower house. And if you noticed, nobody calls it the American Parliament. I don't know if any of you have noticed this ever. It's called the Congress. It's not called the Parliament. Okay, it's the same thing with Germany. They used to call it the Reich. Okay, Japanese call it the Diet. But nobody calls these parliaments. Okay, and we have this thing of the Congress not being called a parliament. That is because it started off as a legislative body. It didn't start as a parliament like it did in the case of the United Kingdom. And the second thing that you note here is that there is bicameralism, and bicameralism came into being for a reason. The lower house, okay, the lower house, which is the House of Representatives, it represents the people of America. Okay, the upper house, the Senate, represents the states of the United States of America. That's what it represents, right from the times that it was 13 states. And talking about the adoption of the Constitution, it was done because 9 states agreed to do. All the 13 didn't want to have the United States of America. Okay, only 9 states wanted to have it. That was considered a sufficient majority to go ahead, and because I told you, George Washington was a unionist, and they decided we'll go ahead and become a United States of America. Now, in India, people have started using this language that the Lok Sabha is that which represents the people, whereas the Rajya Sabha represents the uh,
States.
the states. I'm sorry, but that's not the case. That is really not the case, because if you look at the composition of the House of Representatives, the House comprises of number of representatives decided by the population of the state. Okay, so for example, Maharashtra has 48 seats in the Lok Sabha. You will see that there were others, there are others like Uttar Pradesh who have in the 60s and 70s. And Andhra Pradesh used to be 42, but it has now become, uh, how many is it now? Telangana is how many? Hmm?
Andhra Pradesh 17 for
Andhra,
Telangana.
Telangana?
Telangana has 17 seats, sir.
Yeah,
Andhra Pradesh has 25 seats.
right. Yeah, so that is proportional to the population.
Yes, sir.
Okay, the same system works in the House of Representatives, but in the Senate, which is the house that represents the states, every state sends only 2 members, irrespective of the size of the state. California is a huge state. It sends 2 people. And Delaware is the smallest state. It also sends 2 people. And that is the true representation of the states. Here, people say they are representing the states because of the fact that state assemblies are involved in voting for members of the Rajya Sabha. Okay, and so somebody goes from a certain state, so people say that they are representing the states. Is Nirmala Sitaraman representing Andhra Pradesh? Did Manmohan Singh ever represent Assam? No, they didn't, right? So that is a wrong analogy. It is a deliberate distortion on a small little technicality that these people are elected by members of the respective legislative assemblies. Is based only on that, right? Then how do you explain uh, the legislative councils? We can't explain that. In the states, in the when they where there is also a senate, it is district wise populations as far as House of Representatives is concerned, and again it is the same number of people from each district of that state in the Senate. Here we don't have that. The party that has more numbers sends people. Now, why did this happen in the United States of America? The answer lies in the fact that when the consolidation of the United States was happening, the smaller states, the smaller states were afraid. They were afraid of the fact that they will be dominated by the bigger states which have higher numbers of population. There was a time when people said, if you win in Uttar Pradesh and Bihar, you have won India. Okay? If you get a majority in Uttar Pradesh and Bihar, they accounted before the uh, breaking up of the states into Uttarakhand and Jharkhand. Before that, uh, people said if you won Uttar Pradesh and won Bihar, then you won India. And that is why the South has always been neglected. If you look at the early history of the country, the South was hardly ever, uh, given any importance. And that is the reason why the whole of Tamil Nadu kept on talking about North Indians versus South Indians. They were, of course, camouflaging that in the language of Aryans versus uh, Dravidians. I don't know what Aryan you found in Lalu Prasad Yadav. Does he look like an Aryan? Um, I don't think so. Uh, so if you take that, it's a spurious argument in the case of India. But in the case of the United States, it is a very valid argument. The reason is that the Senate House has been given, the Senate has been given has been given more powers than the House of Representatives, so that the small states do not get steamrolled by the opposition or by the larger states. I'm sorry, that was not the word. They don't get steamrolled by the larger states. Okay, it won't be might is right. That was the concern. Okay, and that is why bicameralism happened there, right? And so the Senate is a true upper house. You must have seen there were two attempts made to impeach uh, Donald Trump in the last 1 year of his presidency. And both times he was bailed out. Why? Because the Senate, which is the upper house, had a greater Republican majority. Okay, and Nancy Pelosi, who was the Speaker of the House of Representatives, she didn't send the impeachment procedures immediately to the Senate. And so they simply said, we don't consider the impeachment as having happened, even in the House of Representatives. So, on technicalities, people can get away with murder. That is one of the things about democracy which I would like to talk to you about. Democracy is not a great system of governance. Nehru was very right when he said democracy is among the worst forms of government, but I support it simply because of the fact that it is probably the only check against the emergence of dictatorships such as the ones that came up in Nazi Germany, fascist Italy, and communist USSR. Okay, so democracy, I don't see it as a solution to problems. I see it as a problematique. And again, I explain problematique is a word which is like a fountain from which different problems arise. And the biggest problem is the problem of representation. Are people actually getting represented? That is the question. Because we have a representative democracy anywhere in the world where they're saying we are. Look at that joke that was happening between Medvedev and Putin in Russia. Putin will be president, Medvedev will be prime minister. Then Medvedev will become president, Putin will become prime minister. Yeah, they were exchanging positions. Okay, now my turn to sit in that chair. Your turn to sit in this chair. So, does representation really happen in democracies? Is a big question. And when I meet you next time, now I'm done. When I meet you next time, uh, I will talk to you about the intended separation of powers, but how that didn't happen, even in the USA. Though it's not as bad as it is in the case of parliamentary systems like Britain and India, it is still not something that has been achieved in the United States of America. And I'll tell you why. And I'll also take a look at uh, not just the separation of powers, but also at this uh, whole issue of, you know, parties. We wrongly believe in India that America has two parties. America doesn't have any parties, just doesn't have any parties. Okay? The Republican Party is like if I call myself Satish Chandra Party. Okay? It's like that. It's as arbitrary as that. You might ask me, how can one person be a party? You can ask the same question about the Republicans and the Democrats. Okay? So, sorry, I think I ate up your brains, and I'm extremely sorry, especially Madam Padma, if she's still here. Apologies, ma'am. I said I'll make my classes smaller, but
Sir, please no.
I wanted to finish a part of this today.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, considering the fact that I missed a few things. And yes, Akshay, thank you very much. You have a question?
Sir, what is difference between due process of law and procedure established by law?
Due process of law is. Can I explain it to you in the next class because it will take time?
Yes, sir.
Ask me right in the beginning,
Yes, sir.
hmm?
Okay,
So
sir.
that I can finish explaining that and then go on to what I want to explain.
Okay, sir.
Okay, so I think you'll all be tired if I start explaining that now.
Yes, sir.
So, okay. So, see you on Monday and have a pleasant Sunday.
Yes, sir. Thank
And
you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
and
Hope you
all
have a
of you,
good Sunday.
thank you. All of you, please take care of yourself. Please take care of yourself. I'm so afraid now. I've lost so many people, and I've lost a very close friend. But even before that, I've lost other friends, and I've lost relatives. I've lost a lot of people. Please be careful. Don't take this thing, don't take it easy with this. It's a horrible thing right now. And if any of you have had COVID and you have recovered, please continue to consult doctors uh, on a regular basis, like say once in 10 days, 15 days, or if you know people who have had COVID and recovered, because some of these variants apparently are throwing up post recovery complications, and that is mainly concerned with the lungs. So please spread this information among all the people that you know, that recovery doesn't mean the end. I'm not being a prophet of doom here. I'm saying the better cautious than not being cautious. Please be in touch with your doctors, and any kind of uh, symptom, however small it might be, like tingling in your fingertips, uh, toes, tingling in your palms, and uh, the soles of your feet, getting some kind of breathing problems while you're just sitting, even if you feel the slightest deficit, because some of these strains apparently have the ability to scar the lungs. So please ask everybody that you know who has had COVID to take care of themselves. Please ask that. Okay. And please be careful, be healthy, be safe. You are the future of the country, and you should be safe. Thank you.
Thank you,
Yes,
sir.
sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.